In Las Vegas's Grand Garden Arena, a confident British actor turned action star was about to test his bravado against living history. What began as a glittering celebration of cinema's martial legacy turned deadly serious when Jason Statham declared himself the real action star. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical Hollywood elder. For decades, he was a six-time world karate champion and founder of Chun Kuk Do, known for defeating opponents with efficiency so precise it bordered on myth. When Statham taunted legends with his bold claim, he had no idea he was inviting a quiet storm. Norris responded not with words, but with presence, unleashing a strategic, effortless demonstration that would trigger a lesson in humility broadcast before thousands. What began as spectacle would become revelation. The Las Vegas crowd would never forget the night ego met discipline, and the silence of Chuck Norris spoke louder than any punch thrown. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas pulsed with anticipation. Thousands of fans filled every seat, their collective energy forming an electric cloud that hung beneath the rafters. Camera flashes pierced the dim lighting like lightning, illuminating banners that celebrated 50 years of action cinema. This wasn't just another fighting event. It was the Action Cinema Legacy exhibition, where legends gathered to honor martial arts on the big screen. Mia Torres adjusted her press credentials, surveying the scene with practiced detachment. As Variety's senior entertainment reporter, she'd covered enough celebrity gatherings to know when something extraordinary might unfold. The crowd's energy felt different tonight, almost reverent. "They've pulled out all the stops," she muttered to her photographer, nodding toward the elaborate stage where a montage of iconic fight scenes played across massive screens. Half the audience paid 4 figures for tickets. Her attention shifted to the VIP section, where recognizable faces from across generations of action films sat in carefully arranged hierarchy. Her gaze paused on one particular figure, a 85-year-old man in a simple black button-up, sitting with perfect posture, his weathered face impassive beneath the signature beard that had become mythic in its own right. Chuck Norris, not surrounded by an entourage, not playing to cameras, simply present. "Look who showed up," she whispered. But before her photographer could respond, the house lights dimmed and the crowd erupted. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the most spectacular gathering of action legends in history." The crowd roared as a highlight reel played decades of iconic moments from martial arts cinema. Each legendary face that appeared on screen triggered waves of applause, but the decibel level reached its peak when the montage ended on a series of jaw-dropping stunts featuring one man, Jason Statham. "And now," the announcer continued, voice rising with theatrical flair, "please welcome our guest of honor, the man who redefined action for the modern era, Jason Statham." The arena exploded as spotlights converged on the entrance. Jason emerged from backstage, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, no tie. Moving with the confident swagger that had become his trademark, he raised a hand to acknowledge the crowd, his expression a study in controlled charisma, neither smiling broadly nor playing aloof, but commanding attention with effortless cool. As he made his way to the stage, cameras tracked his every move. Fans reached out, hoping for a handshake, a touch, anything to connect with the star. Young fighters in the front rows stood, shouting his name. A group of MMA competitors pumped their fists. One of them, a rising star named Kai Anderson, cupping his hands around his mouth to shout, "The real deal." Jason took the microphone, waiting for the noise to settle. The silence that eventually fell carried its own electricity. "Been quite a journey," he began, his gravelly British accent cutting through the room. "From diving competitions to action films. Who'd have thought?" A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the crowd. He paced the stage casually like a predator comfortable in its territory. They asked me to say a few words about action cinema, about its legacy. He paused, scanning the audience. But legacy is a funny thing, isn't it? It's not just about what came before. It's about who carries the torch forward. The crowd hung on each word. The younger fans especially rapt. I've been lucky enough to work with some incredible people, Jason continued. Stunt teams, directors, fellow actors who pushed me to go further, harder, faster. He stopped pacing, planting his feet firmly. But there's something different about what we do now, something that separates us from what came before. A murmur traveled through the older section of the crowd where veterans of the industry sat straighter in their seats. In my films, Jason said, voice dropping to a compelling near whisper that somehow carried to every corner. When you see me jumping off a building or fighting 5 blokes at once, that's not camera tricks or stunt doubles taking the hard falls. He tapped his chest. That's me. Real sweat, real risk, real action. The younger portion of the crowd erupted while scattered applause came from the industry veterans. In the VIP section, several legendary faces exchanged glances. So, when people ask what makes an action star in 2025, Jason continued. Growing, bolder. I'd say it's about bringing authenticity back to the genre, being the real deal. He raised his chin slightly, and I'm proud to stand here as the real action star of our time. The declaration landed like a thunderclap. The arena exploded into noise, many fans on their feet, chanting his name while others applauded politely, expressions more reserved. In the press section, Mia's fingers flew across her tablet. Statham throws down the gauntlet, she typed, claiming the action crown in a room full of legends. The announcer bounded back on stage, feeding on the electricity of the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Statham. What a statement from our guest of honor. Jason offered a slight bow, soaking in the adulation. As he made his way back to his seat in the front row, the spotlights followed, illuminating his path like a conquering hero's return. But in the controlled chaos of the moment, few noticed the subtle shift in the VIP section. Chuck Norris sat exactly as before, posture unchanged, expression serene. Only the slightest tilt of his head indicated he'd registered Jason's claim at all. Yet something in his eyes had sharpened, not anger or offense, but the quiet focus of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of measured response. Kai Anderson, the young MMA fighter, leaned over to his training partner. Man, Statham's not wrong. Those old school guys had it easy with all the camera tricks and wires. Today's action is the real deal. The veteran trainer sitting behind them, a grizzled man named Frank Morgan, who'd worked with martial artists since the 70s, overheard the comment. He glanced toward Chuck Norris, then back to the young fighters. Careful, son, he said softly. Some legends don't need to tell you how real they are. Back on stage, the announcer continued with the program, introducing a demonstration of choreographed fight sequences, but the energy in the room had shifted. Jason's declaration had drawn a line between eras, between philosophies. Most didn't notice that the most significant response wasn't vocal at all. It was in the thoughtful silence of a man who had once been named World Karate Champion 6 consecutive times before ever stepping in front of a camera. Mia Torres noticed, though. She'd been watching Chuck Norris when Jason made his claim. She noted how the legendary martial artist hadn't flinched, hadn't scoffed, hadn't shown any outward reaction except that barely perceptible sharpening of focus. As a journalist who'd built her reputation on recognizing pivotal moments before, they fully materialized. She sensed a story unfolding beneath the surface spectacle. "Keep your camera ready," she told her photographer. "I think the real show hasn't started yet." As the evening progressed through demonstrations and tributes, a curious undercurrent began to flow through the arena. Whispers spread, glances shifted. Between Jason, sitting confidently in the front row, and Chuck, still composed in the VIP section. 2 generations of action stars, 2 philosophies of strength, two approaches to legacy. The crowd, sensing something brewing beneath the surface, grew increasingly restless with anticipation. By the time the announcer returned to introduce the next segment, the atmosphere had transformed. What had begun as a celebration of cinema now felt like the prelude to something unprecedented. History being written in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer called out, riding the wave of energy. "This evening is all about bringing together the greatest talents in action cinema history. And what better way to continue than with some live demonstrations from the masters themselves?" The crowd roared its approval. In the front row, Jason straightened, a half-smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "So," the announcer continued, his voice dropping dramatically, "is there anyone in our audience of legends who'd like to respond to our guest of honor's bold statement, perhaps with a demonstration of their own?" And just like that, the spark was struck. The question hung in the air, an invitation, a challenge, a match held to kindling. All eyes began to scan the VIP section, and slowly, almost in unison, they settled on one man. The silence that followed the announcers. Invitation stretched beyond comfort, becoming its own form of tension. Spotlights swept across the VIP section, cameras panning over the assembled legends. Some shifted in their seats, others exchanged glances, but none stood. Jason Statham rose, casually from his front row seat, confident smile in place, and returned to the stage. Taking the microphone, he paced with easy swagger. "Come on, then," he said, voice playful but with an unmistakable edge. "Surely someone wants to show me how it's done properly." He gestured toward the VIP section. "We've got legends in the house, multiple generations of action stars." The crowd stirred, a mixture of cheers and uncertain murmurs. "No takers?" Jason continued, eyebrows raised. "Well, can't say I blame you. Things have changed since the golden days, haven't they? Training's more intense now, expectations higher." He winked at the audience. "Insurance premiums, too," scattered. Laughter rippled through the arena. Jason was playing the moment perfectly charismatic, cheeky, challenging, without seeming arrogant. In the press section, Mia Torres watched the theater unfold with practiced skepticism. "He's good," she muttered to herself, setting up the old guard to either look cowardly for not responding or foolish for trying to match him. Across the arena, Kai Anderson, the young MMA fighter, cupped his hands around his mouth. No one stepping. "Up, Jason. Guess that answers who the real action star is." More cheers erupted from the younger audience members. The energy shifted again. What had been playful provocation now carried a sharper edge. Jason acknowledged the support with a nod. "Look, it's all love and respect. We all contributed to the legacy in different ways. But if anyone wants to compare notes on what makes a real action performance in 2025, he spread his arms wide. The floor is yours." The announcer, sensing the perfect storm brewing, stepped closer. "Well, folks, seems like our guest of honor has thrown down the gauntlet. Is there anyone who wants to chuck? Chuck, chuck?" The chant began somewhere in the middle sections, tentative at first, then gathering strength as it spread through the arena. "Chuck, chuck, chuck." All eyes turned to the VIP section where Chuck Norris remained seated, hands resting lightly on his knees, expression unchanged. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. Jason's confident smile flickered almost imperceptibly. He hadn't anticipated this specific turn. "Chuck Norris," he acknowledged, nodding respectfully toward the VIP section. "Now there's a legend among legends. Created his own martial art, dominated competitions, then conquered the screen." His tone remained light, playful, though I think the last time he had to do his own stunts. Reagan was president. The joke landed unevenly, some laughter, some uncomfortable, shifting. The chanting continued. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. In the VIP section, nothing changed for several long seconds. Chuck sat motionless, neither acknowledging the chants nor meeting Jason's gaze. The veteran martial artist's stillness created its own gravity, drawing all attention despite his lack of movement. Frank Morgan, the old trainer, leaned forward in his seat. "Now we'll see something," he whispered, eyes fixed on Chuck. Then, with deliberate calm, Chuck Norris stood. The arena erupted cheers, applause, stomping feet. Phones lifted everywhere, capturing the moment. The chanting swelled, "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck," but Chuck himself made no acknowledgement of the noise. He simply stood straight back and steady gaze, fixed on Jason. No smile, no frown, no visible emotion at all. Just focused presence. Jason, master of his own image, recovered quickly. He grinned broadly, arms spread wide in welcome. Chuck Norris, ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, the legend. The announcer bounded across the stage, overcome with excitement. Are we actually witnessing this? The greatest martial artist of the 20th century, responding to our guest of honor's challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, this is unprecedented. Still, Chuck made no theatrical gestures. He simply began walking unhurried, measured steps, carrying him down from the VIP section. The crowd parted before him like water. No one reached out to touch him or called for his attention. There was something in his deliberate movement that commanded a different kind of respect. Mia Torres's fingers flew across her tablet. Norris responds to Statham's provocation not with words, but with presence embodying the contrast between their approaches before any demonstration begins. As Chuck made his way toward the stage, the arena fell into an expectant hush. Even those who had been most vocal moments before now watched in silence, sensing that something momentous was unfolding. Not just entertainment, but a genuine collision of eras and philosophies. Kai Anderson, who had been Statham's most vocal supporter, found himself leaning forward, breath held. Beside him, Frank Morgan nodded slowly. "Watch carefully, son." Fresh, veteran trainer murmured, "You're about to see the difference between someone who performs martial arts and someone who lives them." On stage, Jason maintained his confident posture, but those closest could see a new alertness in his eyes, the instinctive recognition of a genuine challenge. He stepped forward as Chuck approached the stairs. "Chuck Norris, everyone," Jason announced, extending a hand as Chuck reached the stage. "An absolute honor, sir." For the first time, Chuck's expression changed, a slight nod. The ghost of a smile as he shook Jason's hand. The gesture was respectful but measured, neither overly warm nor coldly formal. The announcer, sensing a historic moment in the making, stepped forward with a second microphone, offering it to Chuck. Chuck glanced at it but made no move to take it. The moment stretched uncomfortably until the announcer awkwardly lowered the microphone. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Not one for speeches, I guess," Jason said smoothly, filling the silence. "Man of action, right?" He turned to the crowd with a grin. "That's something we have in common." Scattered laughter, though muted compared to earlier. The atmosphere had shifted again in the theatrical spectacle, now giving way to something more authentic, more unpredictable. So Jason continued, addressing Chuck directly. Now the announcer mentioned demonstrations, bit of friendly competition. Between generations, perhaps show these good people how it's done, your era and mine. Chuck considered this for a moment, then gave a single nod. Just that. No words, no flourish, no playing to the crowd, one deliberate nod. The simple gesture sent ripples of excitement through the arena. Phones lifted higher, social media feeds, exploding with real-time updates. The announcer, recognizing a historic moment in the making, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we're about to witness something truly special. Two icons of action cinema, separated by generation, but united in their mastery, will give us a demonstration right here, right now." Crew members rushed to clear space on the stage. The arena's energy built toward fever pitch. Jason removed his jacket, handing it to a stagehand with a flourish beneath it. His physique was evident even through his shirt, the product of rigorous training regimens and disciplined living. He rolled his shoulders, bounced lightly on his feet, giving the crowd what they expected: preparation as performance. Chuck made no such display. He simply stood, hands at his sides, watching Jason with the patient focus of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of stillness before action. "I should warn you," Jason said, voice pitched to carry to the audience. "I still train every day. Mixed disciplines, endurance work, the lot. Don't go easy on me." His tone was respectful, but carried an unmistakable confidence. Chuck's response was characteristically minimal. Another slight nod, nothing more. The contrast between them could not have been more stark. Jason in motion, playing to the crowd, radiating charisma and physical prowess. Chuck, still economical, present without performance. Mia Torres captured it in a single line. Before a single move is exchanged, the philosophical battle is already visible. Statham's dynamic showmanship versus Norris's quiet mastery. The announcer stepped between them briefly. "Just to be clear, gentlemen, this is a friendly demonstration. Yes, no one's looking to send anyone to the hospital tonight." "Absolutely," Jason agreed quickly, "just showing the fans what real action looks like then and now." He glanced at Chuck with a smile that didn't quite mask his competitive edge. Chuck simply nodded again, eyes never leaving Jason. "Very well." The announcer backed away, arms raised dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for a once-in-a-lifetime demonstration. In this corner, representing the new school of authentic action, Jason Statham." The crowd roared, younger fans especially vocal. And in this corner, the legend himself, martial arts pioneer and icon Chuck Norris. The cheer that followed seemed to shake the arena's foundations. The announcer retreated from the stage entirely, leaving just the two men facing each other in the cleared space. Spotlights tightened around them, creating an impromptu ring bathed in stark white light. For a moment, nothing happened. They stood 3 yards apart, measuring each other in silence. The crowd's energy hung suspended, collective breath held. Then Jason, always aware of pacing and audience expectation, smiled and raised his hands into a fighting stance, a hybrid position that showcased his mixed training background. "Whenever you're ready, sir," he said, voice carrying just enough to be heard in the front rows. Chuck remained motionless for another beat, then slowly, deliberately raised his hands into the distinctive stance of his own creation, the foundation of Chun Kuk Do. And just like that, without announcement or theatrical build-up, the challenge was engaged. Jason moved first, stepping forward with the fluid confidence that had become his trademark. His footwork was precise, each step calculated yet appearing natural, the hallmark of thousands of hours of training transformed into muscle memory. He circled left, hands raised in a guard position that borrowed elements from both boxing and Wing Chun. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice carried over the sound system, though he remained off stage. "What we're witnessing is truly historic. A friendly demonstration between 2 generations of action cinema mastery will give us a demonstration right here, right now." The crowd's roar faded to an expectant hush as Jason initiated the first exchange. He threw a testing jab, quick, sharp, but clearly held back more performance than attack. Chuck deflected it with minimal movement, his forearm barely shifting to redirect the punch's energy. Jason nodded appreciatively, a half smile playing at his lips. He stepped back, bounced twice on the balls of his feet, then launched a more complex combination: jab, cross, followed by a spinning elbow that stopped just short of contact. The sequence was impressive, fast, technically sound, visually dynamic, exactly what his films had made famous. The younger section of the crowd responded with appreciative cheers. Kai Anderson punched his training partner's shoulder. "See that textbook Statham right there?" Chuck's response was economy itself. He slipped the jab, blocked the cross with A subtle parry and simply wasn't there when the elbow came around, having shifted his weight backward just enough that the strike found empty air. No wasted motion, no flourish, just efficient, practiced movement. Frank Morgan nodded slowly. Watch his feet. He murmured to the young fighters seated near him. Norris hasn't moved more than 6 in any direction. Maximum effect, minimum effort. On stage, Jason reset, nodding again with professional respect. But a new intensity had entered his eyes. The demonstration was friendly, but pride was now engaged. He circled again, this time adding a feint before launching a lightning-fast kick aimed at mid-height. Chuck blocked it with a textbook forearm shield, the impact making a sharp sound that carried through the arena. For the first time, he countered a simple front push kick that stopped precisely 1 inch from Jason's solar plexus. Perfect distance, control, perfect timing, no excess force or showmanship. A ripple of appreciation moved through the older martial artists in the audience. They recognized what they were seeing. Decades of disciplined training distilled into pure functional movement. Jason felt it too. His expression shifted subtly, the performer giving way to the martial artist. He stepped back, reassessing. The next sequence he launched was less theatrical, more authentic, a combination he might use in actual sparring rather than on camera. Jab, cross, hook, leg kick, each strike sharp, technically sound. Chuck's defense remained minimal but flawless. He slipped, blocked, parried, and checked. Each movement precise, nothing wasted. When he countered this time, it was with a 3-strike combination executed so quickly that many in the audience missed it entirely. Only those with trained eyes saw the lightning sequence. Palm heel, straight punch, roundhouse kick, each stopping just short of contact. In the press section, Mia Torres watched with growing fascination. "It's like watching 2 different languages," she murmured to her photographer. Statham speaking in exclamation points, Norris in perfect simple sentences. The contrast was becoming increasingly apparent. Jason's style was dynamic, athletic, visually impressive. Martial arts evolved for the camera and modern audience expectations. Chuck's approach was distilled, refined through decades to eliminate anything unnecessary martial arts as functional, discipline, rather than spectacle. Jason, sensing the shift in the crowd's perception, elevated his performance. He launched into a sequence that had become famous from his films, a complex combination of strikes followed by a grappling takedown. That drew appreciative cheers. The moves came fast and fluid, each flowing into the next with choreographed precision. The crowd gasped, then cheered. This was what they had come to see. Authentic action, real skill, star power in motion. But something unexpected happened. As Jason executed the sequence, Chuck didn't just defend, he systematically dismantled each element. A subtle shift made an impressive punch miss by millimeters. A nearly imperceptible weight transfer nullified what should have been an effective sweep. When Jason moved to execute the signature takedown, Chuck simply wasn't where physics dictated. He should be. The sequence ended with Jason slightly off balance. His momentum carried forward into empty space while Chuck stood exactly where he had begun, having moved perhaps a total of 12 in throughout the entire exchange. A murmur rippled through the arena. Those with martial arts experience leaned forward, in their seats. Something remarkable was happening. Not a competition of strength or speed, but a masterclass in the difference between performance and mastery. Kai Anderson's confident expression had faded to one of confusion, then dawning respect. "How did he?" he whispered. Frank Morgan leaned forward. "Efficiency," he said quietly. "Norris isn't trying to look good. He's just being good." On stage, Jason reset once more. The consummate professional acknowledging a challenge greater than anticipated. His next approach was more measured. He circled with new respect in his eyes. Studying Chuck with the focus of a student rather than the confidence of a star, he launched another combination. This one stripped of theatrical elements. Pure, functional martial arts, fast, direct, powerful, the kind of sequence that would work in a real confrontation, rather than playing to camera angles. Chuck's response elevated. His defensive movements remained minimal, but now his counters came with each exchange, not showy, but devastatingly precise. A strike that stopped, a millimeter from contact. A sweep that brushed Jason's ankle just enough to communicate that balance could have been taken. A palm heel that paused exactly at the point where forward momentum would have become impact. The message was clear to anyone with trained eyes. Chuck was demonstrating not just defensive mastery, but complete control of the exchange. He wasn't competing with Jason, he was teaching him. In the audience, the atmosphere shifted again. The younger fans who had cheered Jason's dynamic performance now watched in dawning wonder. The veterans nodded in quiet validation. This wasn't a battle of who could look more impressive. It was a silent conversation between martial artists. The crowd watched in increasingly respectful silence, sensing they were witnessing something rare and authentic. Finally, Jason launched one last combination, his most technical, most grounded sequence yet. No flash, no camera-ready elements, just clean, disciplined martial arts. As he completed the sequence, he stepped back and in a gesture that spoke volumes, bowed slightly to Chuck. Chuck returned the bow, the movement carrying decades of tradition, and just like that, the demonstration concluded not with a dramatic finish or flashy knockout, but with mutual respect between practitioners. The arena erupted into applause, not the raucous cheering of earlier, but something deeper, more reverent. The sound of thousands recognizing they had witnessed something authentic and meaningful. Jason extended his hand. Chuck took it, and for the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face. Small, contained, but unmistakably warm. "Thank you, Jason," said, voice low enough that only Chuck and those in the front rows could hear. That was educational. Chuck nodded once, still holding Jason's hand. "You have good foundations," he said, his first words of the evening. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades of experience. "But remember, the most powerful technique is invisible until needed." With that simple exchange, they turned to acknowledge the crowd together. Side by side, they stood different. Generations, different approaches, different philosophies united in the discipline that had defined their lives. In the press section, Mia's fingers hovered above her tablet. The story had transformed before her eyes. What had begun as celebrity spectacle had become something worthy of deeper reflection. She began to type again. In an era of carefully curated public images and social media personas, tonight the audience witnessed something increasingly rare, an authentic moment of humility and growth played out not through words, but through the ancient language of martial discipline. As Jason and Chuck left the stage together, the crowd continued their standing ovation. But something had changed in how they watched Jason, less as an idol to be cheered, more as a man on a journey they now better understood. Frank Morgan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Young man," he said to Kai, "you just witnessed history." The backstage area of the Grand Garden Arena buzzed with activity. Event staff rushed about. Celebrities mingled in the green room, and media representatives jostled for position, hoping to secure exclusive comments from the evening's most talked-about participants. Jason Statham stood near the refreshment table, water bottle in hand, surrounded by a small circle of admirers and industry figures, offering congratulations. His expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could detect the subtle signs of inner turbulence, a slight tightness around his eyes, a contemplative distance in his gaze. "Brilliant showing, Jason," a studio executive gushed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Social media is absolutely exploding. Statham versus Norris is trending worldwide." Jason nodded, took a measured sip of water. "Appreciate it. You guys should take that on the road," someone else suggested with a laugh. "Sell out arenas across the country." More congratulations followed. more praise for the spectacle. But Jason's responses grew increasingly brief. His gaze kept drifting across the room to where Chuck Norris sat quietly on a folding chair, declining interviews, occasionally nodding to those who approached with reverence, but maintaining the same calm self-containment he displayed on stage. Mia Torres, ever observant, had positioned herself strategically between the two men, noting their contrasting post-demonstration behaviors. Jason surrounded yet somehow isolated, Chuck solitary yet completely at peace. When the crowd around, Jason momentarily thinned, she approached, recorder in hand. "Mr. Statham, Mia Torres from Variety. May I ask you a few questions about what just happened out there?" Jason studied her briefly, seeming to weigh something internally, then nodded. "Sure, but let's step over here." He gestured toward a quieter corner. Once they were relatively secluded, Mia activated her recorder. "That demonstration took an unexpected turn," she began. "What was going through your mind during those exchanges?" Jason was quiet for a moment, uncharacteristically thoughtful. "You know," he finally said, "in my films, we rehearse every sequence for weeks. Multiple camera angles, perfect lighting, 20 takes to get it right. Out there with Chuck." He shook his head slightly. That was something else entirely. "How so?" "He wasn't performing," Jason said simply. "Not for the crowd, not for himself, not for anyone. Every movement came from somewhere deeper. Decades of discipline distilled into pure efficiency." He gazed across, the room toward Chuck. "I've trained with some of the best fighters in the world, but I've never felt what I felt out there tonight," which was Jason considered the question carefully. Complete control without dominance. Complete confidence without ego. He paused. "It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it firsthand." Mia nodded, sensing she was witnessing a rare moment of genuine reflection from a star typically guarded with the press. "You said earlier this evening that you represent the real action star of our time. Has that perspective changed after this exchange?" The question hung between them. In the background, the bustling activity of the backstage area continued. But, in their corner, a pocket of contemplative silence had formed. "I meant what I said about doing my own stunts, about bringing authenticity back to action films," Jason finally responded. But out there with Chuck, he shook his head again. "I realized I've been confusing authenticity with visibility. He showed me there's a deeper level, something beyond what plays well on camera or generates headlines." Before Mia could follow up, they were interrupted by Kai Anderson, the young MMA fighter who had been Jason's most vocal supporter earlier in the evening. His confident demeanor had given way to a more subdued, almost reverent approach. "Mr. Statham," he said, extending his hand, "wanted to say it was an honor watching you work tonight." Jason shook his hand. "Appreciate that. I actually came to ask." Kai hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Do you think Mr. Norris would mind if I introduced myself? I've been competing professionally for 3 years now, and what I saw tonight was he trailed off, searching for words." "Life-changing?" Jason suggested with the ghost of a smile. Kai nodded, grateful for the understanding. "Come on," Jason said. "I'd like to speak with him again myself." Mia watched as they crossed the room together, noting how the crowd seemed to instinctively part before them. Chuck looked up as they approached, his expression revealing nothing. "Mr. Norris," Jason began, "this young man wanted to introduce himself. Kai Anderson. He's making quite a name for himself in MMA." Chuck nodded to the young fighter who seemed suddenly at a loss for words in the presence of the legend. "Sir," Kai finally managed, "I just wanted to say thank you. What you showed us tonight was he," shook his head, still struggling to articulate the impact. "Keep training," Chuck said simply. "Not for cameras, not for glory, for discipline." Just 7 words, but delivered with such quiet authority that Kai straightened involuntarily, as if receiving wisdom directly from a master. "Yes, sir," he responded with none of the brash confidence he'd displayed earlier. As Kai stepped back, visibly processing the encounter, Jason took the opportunity to address Chuck directly. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice low enough that only those closest could hear. Chuck shook his head slightly. No apology needed. Every martial artist walks their own path. Still, Jason persisted. "What I said up there about being the real action star, it came from a place of," he paused, searching for the right word, "pride." Chuck supplied without judgment. Jason nodded, accepting the assessment. "Yes, pride. Pride has its place," Chuck said. "It fuels excellence, but it must be balanced with humility or it becomes weakness." The wisdom of the statement hung in the air between them. From her position, nearby, Mia observed the interaction with growing fascination. This wasn't the manufactured drama of publicity stunts or the carefully managed image control typical of celebrity encounters. This was something raw and genuine, a moment of transformation happening before her eyes. "I'd like to learn more," Jason said finally, "if you're willing to share." Chuck studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "The first lesson already happened," he said. "Out there on the stage." "What was it?" "That true strength isn't about who's watching," Chuck said calmly, through demonstration rather than explanation. Jason nodded slowly, and the more weariness in his eyes. "Centrality," Chuck replied. "When your center disconnects from your extremities, balance fails regardless of strength." Jason frowned, processing this. It sounded like the kind of mystical nonsense he regularly mocked in his videos. Yet he had just physically experienced its reality. "Let's go again," he said, resetting his stance. This time, Jason approached more methodically, trying to isolate and understand the principles being used against him. He threw a measured jab, watching carefully for Chuck's response. Instead of avoiding as before, Chuck intercepted the strike with a subtle circular movement, connecting to Jason's arm and continuing its energy rather than opposing it. The redirection created a spiraling force that Jason felt propagate through his body, pulling him off balance and into a vulnerable position. Again, Chuck could have followed with a decisive strike or takedown. Again, he simply demonstrated the principle, allowing Jason to experience the consequence without exploitation. "Continuity," Chuck explained quietly. "Force diverted rather than opposed requires no counterforce." Jason reset, increasingly intent on the puzzle before him rather than the performance he had planned. Each exchange revealed another layer of principles: connection, centrality, continuity, responsive awareness, physical truths that transcended specific techniques or styles. The encounter continued, its nature transforming with each exchange. What had begun as a challenge was becoming a lesson. What had been intended as confrontation was evolving into collaboration. Jason attacking with increasing sincerity. Chuck responding with escalating clarity of demonstration. For 15 minutes, this dance continued. Attack and response, question and answer. Each exchange distilling decades of martial understanding into physical dialogue. Jason's frustration gradually gave way to reluctant fascination, his movements becoming less performative and more genuinely inquiring. The watching students observed in respectful silence, recognizing that they were witnessing not just defense against a challenger, but a profound teaching opportunity. Chuck expressing through action the principles he usually conveyed through more gradual training. Finally, sensing a natural conclusion approaching, Chuck allowed one of Jason's strikes to connect not out of failure but as deliberate choice. The contact gave him the connection point he needed to demonstrate the final principle, using Jason's own force as the source of a definitive counter that placed the younger fighter decisively on the mat. This time there was no ambiguity about what had happened. The throw was clean, controlled, and undeniable. A clear conclusion to the physical conversation. Jason lay on his back, breathing hard, staring up at the darkening sky visible above the arena. The artificial lights from his crew setup cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the profound confusion and dawning realization in his expression. Chuck stood calmly, centered, and composed, waiting patiently for Jason to rise on his own terms, offering neither assistance nor dominance. The moment hung suspended between them, challenge answered, question resolved, understanding beginning to emerge. The arena had fallen into profound silence. The ambient sounds of Las Vegas evening, distant traffic, pedestrian murmurs, the soft chirping of crickets seemed amplified against the hush of collective astonishment. Every eye remained fixed on the center of the makeshift ring, where the outcome no one had anticipated was now undeniable. Jason stood in the harsh camera lights, sweat gleaming on his skin, his carefully styled hair disheveled, his branded athletic wear bearing the marks of repeated contact with the mat. The most remarkable change, however, was in his expression. The cocky showmanship completely erased, replaced by genuine humility and dawning understanding. "Cut the live stream," he said quietly to his crew. "What?" "But we're at peak, viewers. End it," Jason repeated firmly. "Some things shouldn't be packaged as entertainment." After a moment's hesitation, the crew complied. Cameras lowered, lights dimmed, the performative aspect dissolving as equipment powered down. The sudden reduction in artificial illumination allowed the natural evening light to reassert itself. Soft paper lanterns along the arena walls. Warm yellow spill from the building's interior. The first stars appearing above. The crowd beyond the gates remained, phones still raised, but their owners now watching with quiet attention rather than excitement. What had begun as spectacle had become something approaching ceremony, witnessing something meaningful rather than merely entertaining. In this gentler light, Chuck stood relaxed, yet dignified, his black GI barely showing a wrinkle, despite the extended exchange. His breathing had already returned to normal, his presence once again centered and calm. Jason approached him slowly, stopping at a respectful distance before bowing deeply formally with none of the mockery that had characterized his earlier gestures. "I owe you an apology, Sensei," he said, straightening for my disrespect, for my assumptions. Chuck studied him before nodding once in acknowledgement. Recognizing a mistake is the first step in transcending it. "I came here thinking I knew everything about fighting." Jason continued, genuine humility in his voice. "But I realized tonight that I've only been studying techniques, not principles." "A common confusion," Chuck replied. "Techniques are finite. Principles are eternal." Jason nodded, absorbing this. "I'd like to understand more if you're willing to teach." A murmur ran through the watching students. This was unprecedented. The social media star who had built his brand on dismissing traditional martial arts, now requesting instruction from the very tradition he had mocked. Chuck didn't answer immediately. He looked past Jason to where the green belt lay on the ground, yanked from the young student earlier and tossed contemptuously aside. Following Chuck's gaze, Jason turned and saw it too. Without prompting, he walked over, bent down, and picked up the belt, carefully folding it with the respect it deserved. He returned and offered it to Chuck with both hands. "This belongs to your student," he said. "I apologize for dishonoring it." Chuck accepted the belt with a slight nod. "It is not the belt that carries honor, but the person who wears it." Still, recognizing its symbolism is a beginning. He turned and beckoned to the young green belt student who stepped forward nervously. "Takeo," Chuck said, handing him the belt. "This represents your journey. No one can take that from you unless you allow it." The boy nodded seriously, tying the belt around his waist with careful precision. Chuck turned back to Jason. "Learning begins with emptying your cup. Are you prepared to set aside what you think you know?" "Yes, Sensei," Jason replied without hesitation. "Then the first lesson has already been given, and it did not require this staging." For the first time, Jason looked genuinely embarrassed. He glanced around at the cameras and artificial boundaries his crew had constructed. "I'm sorry for that, too. We'll take it all down. Leave your courtyard as we found it. Appearances matter. Less than intentions, but yes, restoring harmony would be appropriate." As Jason turned to instruct his crew, Mia stepped forward. "Sensei, the spectators at the gate." Indeed, beyond the arena's entrance, the crowd remained, no longer raucous, but watching with quiet respect. Sensing that something significant was still unfolding, Chuck considered this. They came seeking spectacle, but perhaps they can leave, with understanding. He turned to Jason. "Would you address them? Tell them what you've learned here." Jason hesitated, visibly struggling with the implications. His entire brand, his following, his income, were built on the premise he had just discovered, to be fundamentally flawed. To acknowledge that publicly would require not just humility, but courage. Old man Morgan approached his weathered hand, coming to rest on Jason's shoulder. "The most difficult opponent is always one's own ego." Jason met the old man's eyes, then straightened his shoulders and nodded. "I'll tell them all of it." He walked to the arena gates, his crew trailing behind uncertainly as the heavy wooden doors swung open. Phones lifted again, the crowd pressing closer to capture whatever came next. Jason faced them directly. No cameras mediating his message, no filters or edits, just a man speaking truth to an audience that had expected something very different. "I came here today to prove that traditional martial arts are obsolete, that they don't work in real fighting situations." He paused. "I was wrong." A murmur ran through the crowd. "What I experienced tonight wasn't about techniques or styles. It wasn't old versus new or tradition versus innovation. It was about principles, universal principles that transcend any particular fighting system." He gestured back toward Chuck. "Sensei Norris didn't defeat me with better techniques. He showed me that I've been missing the foundation that makes techniques meaningful." Jason's voice strengthened, conviction replacing uncertainty. "I built my name challenging traditional martial arts, claiming they don't work in real situations. But tonight, I learned that I've been mistaking the packaging for the content. True martial arts, regardless of style, are about principles of balance, awareness, and relationship that apply in any context." He drew a deep breath. "Starting now, I'm taking down all my takedown videos. They missed the point entirely." One of his crew stepped forward urgently, whispering in his ear, clearly concerned about the business implications. Jason listened, then shook his head firmly. "No, it's the right thing to do." He turned back to the audience. "I came here looking for content. I found something worth much more, a path to actual understanding. I'm going to start over, approaching martial arts with the respect they deserve." He bowed deeply to the crowd, genuinely expressing his changed perspective. "Thank you for witnessing this. I hope you'll join me on a more authentic journey going forward." With that, he stepped back and closed the arena gates, shutting out the murmuring crowd. For the first time since their arrival, the arena grounds were closed to outside viewers. The remainder of the evening's events private rather than public. The finish was complete, not with a victor and vanquished, but with transformation, not with humiliation, but with humility, not with division reinforced, but with the first steps toward integration. And in the growing darkness illuminated now only by the arena's simple lanterns, a new path forward had been revealed, not just for Jason, but for everyone who had witnessed the encounter. A path beyond the false dichotomy of traditional versus modern, a return to the universal principles that had always united rather than divided the true martial way. 3 months passed, the incident at Grand Garden Arena fading from public consciousness as quickly as it had flared. Las Vegas's attention moved on to new sensations, new controversies, new trending topics that captured momentary interest before dissolving into the constant flow of urban life. Yet within certain circles, the effects continued to ripple outward, transforming individuals and communities in ways both subtle and profound. Each morning at precisely 6 a.m., Jason arrived at the dojo, no longer accompanied by cameras or crew, no longer dressed in branded performance wear. Instead, he wore the simple white GI of a beginner, his belt uncolored, his previous accomplishments set aside as he rebuilt his understanding from the foundation. Again, Chuck would say simply, and Jason would repeat the fundamental movement. Pattern, not a technique so much as a principle embodied, a physical understanding of concepts that transcended any particular fighting style. Better, Chuck would acknowledge the single word more meaningful than any elaborate praise. After training, Jason would stay to help clean the dojo, sweeping the floor, wiping down equipment, maintaining the space with the same care he was learning to bring to his movement. These tasks, once considered beneath him, now formed an integral part of his education. On this particular morning, as Jason finished his cleaning duties, Mia approached him with an iPad. "Have you seen this?" she asked, opening a browser window. The headline read, "Social media stars transformation sparks movement for martial arts integration." Below was a photo of Jason and his white GI training alongside other beginners under Chuck's guidance. Mia's article, Jason recognized, scanning the text. "I didn't realize it had been picked up internationally." "Not just picked up," Mia said, scrolling to show comments. "It started conversations across different martial arts communities. Traditional practitioners and modern fighters are actually discussing principles rather than arguing about whose style is superior." "That wasn't my intention when I barged in here 3 months ago," Jason said, shaking his head in wonder. "Intentions evolve," came Chuck's voice as he approached silently. "As do people." "The video we released has over 5 million views," Mia added. "Comments are overwhelmingly positive. People appreciate the honesty about your change in perspective." After careful consideration, Jason had allowed a condensed version of the encounter to be released. Unlike his previous videos, this one had been framed as a lesson rather than a contest, with Jason providing voice over explaining what he had learned. The video ended not with triumphant victory, but with his public statement at the arena gates and a simple caption, "Day 1 of a new journey." "It seems you've influenced more than just yourself," Chuck noted with subtle approval. Jason looked down, still uncomfortable with praise. "I'm trying to undo some of the damage I caused," he said. "All those videos mocking traditional training. I never considered the full impact." "The past cannot be changed," Chuck reminded him. "Only acknowledged and transcended. Your focus should remain on today's training, not yesterday's mistakes." As they spoke, Old Man Morgan entered, accompanied by an unexpected visitor, a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing the formal GI of a traditional karate master, complete, with worn black belt and embroidered insignia of a notable school. "Mr. Norris," Morgan called. "An old acquaintance has come to pay his respects." Chuck turned, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Master Takashi," he acknowledged with a slight bow. "It has been many years?" The visitor returned the bow deeper and more formal. "Too many, nor I should not have waited for viral videos to remind me of your wisdom." Mia explained quietly to Jason that Takashi was a renowned traditional karate master who had famously opposed the integration of modern methods into classical training. His dojo was known for strict adherence to forms and rituals that many younger practitioners considered outdated. "I have watched the video of your encounter," Takashi said, addressing Jason directly. "It was most illuminating." Jason lowered his eyes respectfully. "I am still learning how much I don't know." "Master Takashi." Takashi turned to Chuck. "Your demonstration of principles transcending techniques was persuasive. It has caused me to reflect on my own teaching methods. Coming from such a traditionalist, this admission was remarkable. I would like to propose a collaboration between our dojos," Takashi continued. "An exchange of knowledge." My students excel in the precision of traditional forms. Yours clearly understand the adaptable application of principles. Both perspectives have value. Both have limitations when practiced in isolation. Bridges between. Traditions strengthen all who cross them, Chuck replied. We would welcome such an exchange. 2 months later, the collaboration had blossomed beyond initial expectations. What began as a cautious exchange had evolved into regular joint training sessions, with students from both dojos discovering value in different approaches to the same fundamental principles. Jason had advanced rapidly his previous athletic training, providing a strong physical foundation that, when coupled with his new humility, accelerated his progress. Chuck had recently awarded him a yellow belt, symbolically significant given his starting point. More meaningful was his role in the dojo's community outreach program, which had expanded from 1 weekly class to 3, twice a week after his regular training. And once on weekends, Jason helped teach fundamentals to children and teenagers from Las Vegas's less privileged neighborhoods. Remember, he would tell them, I thought I knew everything about fighting before I came here. Now, I understand that I was only seeing the surface of a very deep lake. On this particular evening, Jason was demonstrating a basic centering exercise to a group of 12 teenagers, several of whom had initially attended with visible skepticism, but had gradually become regular participants. Feel the difference, he instructed, showing how a slight adjustment created markedly different results. It's not about strength or speed. It's about alignment, structure, relationship. From the doorway, Chuck watched silently. Beside him stood Mia, her camera lowered. Respectfully, in accordance with the dojo's policy for community classes. He's found his voice as a teacher, she observed quietly. Chuck nodded. Teaching accelerates learning. In explaining to others, we clarify our own understanding. The article series has been picked up by 3 more international publications, Mia informed him. Martial arts schools across 4 continents are implementing integrated approaches based on the principles you demonstrated. Chuck received this with characteristic equanimity. Ideas spread when their time has come. We were merely the catalyst, not the cause. As the class concluded and the students filed out, one lingered behind. A lanky 15-year-old named Hiro, who had been among the most skeptical when the program began. Jason Sensei, he said, the honorific still sounding slightly awkward. Some guys in my neighborhood, they've been watching your old videos. They're saying you've sold out, that you used to be real, but now you're just another traditional fake. What do you think, Hiro? Jason asked, turning the question back. The boy considered this seriously. I think you actually got more real, not less, he said finally. Anyone can talk trash and look tough. It takes more strength to admit when you're wrong and change direction. That's a wisdom many adults never achieve, Jason said genuinely. Moved. Hold on to it. But how do I explain that to them? Hiro pressed. They won't listen to philosophy stuff. You don't explain. Chuck's voice as he approached. You demonstrate. Actions illuminate where words cast shadows. Live what you have learned. Your friends will notice the change in you. Your confidence, your centeredness, your peace. Some will become curious, others will not accept both outcomes with equanimity. Later, in the quiet garden behind the dojo, under stars now fully visible, Chuck, Mia, Jason, and Old Man gathered on a stone bench. The maple trees were showing their autumn colors, nature's own lesson in constant change within enduring cycles. 3 months ago, Jason reflected, I stormed into this arena convinced. I knew everything worth knowing about fighting. I couldn't have imagined sitting here now, helping to welcome new students to the very tradition I once dismissed. The journey from certainty to openness, Chuck observed, is the essence of true learning. Not accumulating more knowledge, but becoming, available to deeper understanding. And it continues, Mia added. For all of us always. Chuck confirmed. The path has no end point, only continued walking. In the quiet garden, Jason felt a profound sense of homecoming. Not to a physical place, but to a way of being, a way of learning, a way of connecting. The challenge that had begun as confrontation had evolved into collaboration. The clash that had been intended as defeat had transformed into mutual growth. And the echo of that first meeting continued to ripple outward, touching lives, bridging divides, healing artificial separations between tradition and innovation, between past and future, between self and other. The circle was complete. The journey continued. The path stretched forward, endless and inviting. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.